Chapter 4 Part B Habit number 1 Winning too much. Winning too much is easily the most common behavioral problem that I observe in successful people. There's a fine line between being competitive and over-competitive, between winning when it counts and when no one's counting, and successful people cross that line with alarming frequency. Let's be clear, I'm not disparaging competitiveness. I'm pointing out that it's a problem when we deploy it at the service of objectives that simply are not worth the effort. Winning too much is the number one challenge, because it underlies nearly every other behavioral problem. If we argue too much, it's because we want our view to prevail over everyone else, i.e., it's all about winning. If we're guilty of putting down other people, it's our stealthy way of positioning them beneath us again, winning. If we ignore people, again it's about winning by making them fade away. If we withhold information, it's to give ourselves an edge over others. If we play favorites, it's to win over allies and give our side an advantage. And so on. So many things we do to annoy people stem from needlessly trying to be the alpha male or female in any situation, i.e., the winner. Our obsession with winning rears its noisome head across the spectrum of human endeavor, not just among senior executives. When the issue is important, we want to win. When the issue is trivial, not worth our time and energy, we want to win. Even when the issue is clearly to our disadvantage, we want to win. If you've achieved any modicum of success, you're guilty of this every day. When you're in a meeting at work, you want your position to prevail. When you're arguing with your significant other, you'll pull out all the stops to come out on top, whatever that means. Even when you're in the checkout line at the supermarket, you're scouting the other lines to see which is moving faster. I was at a backyard party once watching a one-on-one basketball game between a father and his 9-year-old son. The father had a 2-foot height advantage over the son, plus 120 pounds, and 30 years of experience. He was also the dad, trying to have a good time and maybe impart some court smarts to the young spawn of his loins. The game started off merrily and nonchalantly with the dad giving the young kid games and do-overs to keep him enthused. But about 10 minutes into this alleged fun, the father's gotta-win genes kicked in, and he started playing as if the score mattered. He guarded his son closely, engaged in trash talk, and actually took pleasure in beating him 11 baskets to 2. That's how pervasive this urge to win is. Even when it's beyond trivial, when it actually can scar someone we love, we still want to win. It's easy to disapprove of this father's behavior from a distance. We assure ourselves that we would never behave so insensitively. Is that so? Let's say that you want to go to dinner at restaurant 10. Your spouse, partner, or friend wants to go to restaurant Y. You have a heated debate about the choice. You point out the bad reviews Y has received. But you grudgingly yield and end up going to restaurant Y. The experience confirms your misgivings. Your reservation is lost, and you have to wait 30 minutes. The service is slow, the drink's weak, and the food tastes like ripe garbage. You have two options during this painful experience. Option A, critique the restaurant and smugly point out to your partner how wrong he or she was, and how this debacle could have been avoided if only you had been listened to. Option B, shut up and eat the food. Mentally write it off and enjoy the evening. I have told my clients on these two options for years. The results are consistent. 75% of clients say they would critique the restaurant. What do they all agree that they should do? Shut up and have a good time. If we do a cost-benefit analysis, we generally conclude that our relationship with our partner is far more important than winning a trivial argument about where to eat. And yet, the urge to win trumps our common sense. We do the wrong thing even when we know what we should do. It gets worse. A few years ago, I offered my coaching services free to one of the United States Army's top generals. He asked, who would be your ideal client? I told him, your generals are busy people, with even less free time than I have, so let's make it count. I'd like to work with someone who is a smart, dedicated, hardworking, driven to achieve, patriotic, wants to do what's right, technically gifted, hard to replace, brilliant, competent, arrogant, stubborn, opinionated know-it-all. Do you think you could find me one? Find you one? He laughed. We have a target-rich environment. So, I had the opportunity to train many Army generals that first year. In one group training session with the generals, their wives attended too. It was fun to watch how the generals handled the dinner quiz. About 25% of the generals said they would do the right thing, i.e., they'd shut up and enjoy dinner. That's when their wives stood up, gave their husbands a non-approved salute, and ripped into them. The wives said that their husbands would do no such thing. That's how strong the urge to win is. Even with a material witness in the room, i.e., their spouse, who they know will dispute them, many generals still try to give the answer that made them appear in the most attractive light. If the need to win is the dominant gene in our success DNA, the overwhelming reason we are successful, then winning too much is a perverse genetic mutation that can limit our success. What I'm going to suggest repeatedly in this book is the heretical notion that we can become more successful if we appreciate this flaw and work to suppress it in our interpersonal relations. Habit number 2: adding too much value. The two men at dinner were clearly on the same wavelength. One of them was John Katzenbach, the ex-McKinsey director, who now heads his own elite consulting boutique. The other fellow was Nico Ginner, his brilliant protege and partner. They were plotting out a new venture. But something about their conversation was slightly off. Every time Nico floated an idea, Katzenbach interrupted him. That's a great idea, he would say, but it would work better if you... And then he would trail off into a story about how it worked for him several years earlier in another context. When John finished, Nico would pick up where he left off, only to be interrupted within seconds by John again. This went on back and forth like a long rally at Wimbledon. As the third party at the table, I watched and listened. As an executive coach, I'm used to monitoring people's dialogues, listening with forensic intensity for clues that reveal why these otherwise accomplished people annoy their bosses, peers, and subordinates. Ordinarily I keep quiet in these situations. But John was a friend exhibiting classic destructive smart person behavior. I said, John, will you please be quiet and let Nico talk? Stop trying to add value to the discussion. What John Katzenbach was displaying in full flower was a variation on the need to win, the need to add value. It's common among leaders used to running the show. They still retain remnants of the top-down management style, where their job was to tell everyone what to do. These leaders are smart enough to realize that the world has changed, that most of their subordinates know more in specific areas than they ever will. But old habits die hard. It is extremely difficult for successful people to listen to other people tell them something that they already know without communicating somehow that we already knew, that and we know a better way. That's the problem with adding too much value. Imagine you're the CEO. I come to you with an idea that you think is very good. Rather than just pat me on the back and say, great idea. Your inclination, because you have to add value, is to say, good idea, but it'll be better if you tried it this way. The problem is, you may have improved the content of my idea by 5%, but you reduced my commitment to executing it by 50%, because you've taken away my ownership of the idea. My idea is now your idea and I walk out of your office less enthused about it than when I walked in. That's the fallacy of added value. Whatever we gain in the form of a better idea is lost many times over in our employees' diminished commitment to the concept. Katzenbach and I had a laugh over this dinner incident later on. As one of the world's leading authorities on team building, John should have known better. But that's how pernicious the need to win can be. Even when we know better, we fall into its clutches. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that bosses have to zip their lips to keep their staff spirits from sagging. But the higher up you go in the organization, the more you need to make other people winners and not make it about winning yourself. For bosses, this means closely monitoring how you hand out encouragement. If you find yourself saying, great idea, and then dropping the other shoe with a tempering but or however, try cutting your response off at idea. Even better, before you speak, take a breath and ask yourself if what you're about to say is worth it. One of my clients, who's now the CEO of a major pharmaceutical, said that once he got into the habit of taking a breath before he talked, he realized that at least half of what he was going to say wasn't worth saying. Even though he believed he could add value, he realized he had more to gain by not winning. As for employees who have to bear the brunt of their boss's need to add value, be confident about your expertise, and, short of being insubordinate, stick to your position. Years ago, a chocolate maker I know in San Francisco agreed to make a sampler box of 12 chocolates for the late designer Bill Blass. They designed a dozen different chocolates for Blass's approval, which he insisted upon since the chocolates would bear his name. But sensing that he would resent not having a choice, they seeded the selection with a dozen other types, which they regarded as clearly inferior. To the chocolatier's horror, when Blass entered the room for the tasting, he liked all the inferior chocolates. The chocolatiers hadn't expected Blass to be so firm in his opinion. But Blass was a man of great taste, used to getting his way, and he knew what he liked. He needed to add value to the process. After Blass left the room, the chocolate makers looked at each other, all thinking the same thing: what are we going to do? He picked all the wrong ones. Finally, the head of the company, which was a family business that had thrived for 7 generations, said, we know chocolate. He doesn't. Let's make the ones we like and he'll never know the difference. Sweet. Habit number 3: passing judgment. There's a cute scene between Jack Nicholson and Diane Keaton in the movie Something's Gotta Give. Keaton plays a successful 50-ish divorced playwright, while Nicholson is a 60s tycoon with a Lothario reputation, who happens to be dating her daughter. Nicholson is forced to spend a few nights at Keaton's lavish weekend home, recovering from a mild cardiac episode. He and Keaton start off loathing each other, but cool off sufficiently to have a flirtatious discussion late one evening in Keaton's kitchen, while she prepares a midnight snack. Keaton says, I can't imagine what you think of me. Nicholson asks, do you ever miss being married? Sometimes, she says. Yeah, at night. But not that much anymore. The subject shifts momentarily to what they want to eat, but Keaton, in a not-so-subtle attempt to elicit feedback, brings the conversation back on point. Did one of us just say something interesting? She muses. You said you can imagine what I think of you. You don't have to answer that, she says. Okay, he says agreeably. But if you have an opinion, I'd be curious, says Keaton. Will you tell me first why you only miss being married at night? Says Nicholson. Well, the phone doesn't ring that much at night. The whole alone thing happens at night. Sleeping by myself took some getting used to. But I got the hang of it. You gotta sleep in the middle of the bed. It's absolutely not healthy to have a side when no one has the other side, she says. Encouraged by her explanation, Nicholson says, now I'm convinced that what I think of you is right. You're a tower of strength. Ugh. Says Keaton. Try not to rate my answer, says Nicholson. I know it's only a romantic comedy, but the scene rings true. Even in the most gentle, intimate moments, when people are offering us their most acute and helpful snapshots of ourselves, we can't help passing judgment. We can't help ranking what they tell us, lining it up as more pleasing or insightful than what we expected them to say, or what we think ourselves, or what we have heard from others on the same subject. There's nothing wrong with offering an opinion in the normal give and take of business discussions. You want people to agree or disagree freely. But it's not appropriate to pass judgment when we specifically ask people to voice their opinions about us. In those moments when other people have passed judgments on advice they have solicited from me, my first thought is, who died and made you the critic-in-chief? This is true, even if you ask a question and agree with the answer. Consciously or not, the other person will register your agreement. And he or she will remember it with great specificity when you don't agree the next time. The contrast is telling. The person thinks, what was wrong with what I said? Why did I bother? It's no different than a CEO in a meeting asking for suggestions about a problem and telling one subordinate, that's a great idea. then telling another subordinate, "That's a good idea," and saying nothing at all to a third subordinate's suggestion. The first individual is probably pleased and encouraged to have the CEO's approval. The second individual is slightly less pleased. The third individual is neither encouraged nor pleased. But you can be sure of two things. First, everyone in the room has made a note of the CEO's rankings. Second, no matter how well-intentioned the CEO's comments are, the net result is that grading people's answers rather than just accepting them without comment makes people hesitant and defensive. People don't like to be critiqued, however obliquely. That's why passing judgment is one of the more insidious ways we push people away and hold ourselves back from greater success. The only sure thing that comes out of passing judgment on people's efforts to help is that they won't help us again. How do we stop passing judgment, especially when people are honestly trying to help us? One of the awkward situations in my line of work is clients being concerned about whether I approve or disapprove of their behavior and by extension, how I feel about the change they're trying to make. I try to disabuse them of this thinking immediately. I tell them that in any campaign for affecting long-term positive change, we have a choice. We can view the campaign in an approving light, a disapproving light, or with complete neutrality. Mission positive. Mission negative. Or mission neutral. I assure them that I am mission neutral. I don't deal in approval or disapproval. I don't judge. It's not my job to weigh in on whether you're a good person or bad, because you've decided to change A rather than B. It's the same as a medical doctor dealing with patients. If you walk into the examining room with a broken leg, the doctor doesn't pass judgment on how you broke your leg. He doesn't care if you broke your leg committing a crime or kicking the dog, or tripping down the stairs or getting hit by a car. He only cares about fixing your leg. You need to extend that same attitude, the doctor's mission-neutral purpose, to dealing with people trying to help you. And here I am not referring only to the people who are trying to help you change. You are not allowed to judge any helpful comment offered by a colleague or friend or family member. No matter what you privately think of the suggestion, you must keep your thoughts to yourself, hear the person out, and say, "Thank you." Try this, for 1 week treat every idea that comes your way from another person with complete neutrality. Think of yourself as a human Switzerland. Don't take sides. Don't express an opinion. Don't judge the comment. If you find yourself constitutionally incapable of just saying thank you, make it an innocuous, "Thanks, I hadn't considered that." Or, "Thanks. You've given me something to think about." After 1 week, I guarantee you will have significantly reduced the number of pointless arguments you engage in at work or at home. If you continue this for several weeks, at least 3 good things will happen. First, you won't have to think about this sort of neutral response. It will become automatic, as easy as saying, "God bless you," when someone sneezes. Second, you will have dramatically reduced the hours you devote to contentious interfacing. When you don't judge an idea, no one can argue with you. Third, people will gradually begin to see you as a much more agreeable person, even when you are not in fact agreeing with them. Do this consistently and people will eventually brand you as a welcoming person, someone whose door they can knock on when they have an idea, someone with whom they can spitball casual ideas and not end up spitting at each other. If you can't self-monitor your judgmental responses, hire a friend to call you out, and bill you hard cash every time you make a judgmental comment. It could be your spouse at home, your assistant, or a buddy at work. If you're docked $10 for each incident of gratuitous judgment, you'll soon feel the same pain you've been inflicting on others and stop. Habit number 4: making destructive comments. Destructive comments are the cutting, sarcastic remarks we spew out daily, with or without intention, that serve no other purpose than to put people down, hurt them, or assert ourselves as their superiors. They are different from comments that add too much value, because they add nothing but pain. They run the gamut from a thoughtless jab in a meeting that wasn't very bright to gratuitous comments about how someone looks nice tie with a smirk to elaborately planned critiques of people's past performances that everyone but you has forgotten. Do you remember the time you press people to list the destructive comments they have made in the last 24 hours, and they will quite often come up blank? We make destructive comments without thinking and therefore without noticing or remembering. But the objects of our scorn remember. Press them and they will accurately replay every biting comment we've made at their expense. That's a statistical fact. The feedback I've collected says that avoids destructive comments is one of the 2 items with the lowest correlation between how we see ourselves and how others see us. In other words, we don't think we make destructive comments, but the people who know us disagree. One of my clients told me that for his 40th birthday, his colleagues and friends held a roast, where the evening's theme required everyone to recite one biting remark that he had made over the years at their expense. An interesting gambit, they were making fun of the birthday boy by revisiting the times he had made fun of them. It was a ruckus, hilarious evening. "Here's the thing," said my client. "Of the dozens of nasty funny comments I heard that night, I didn't remember saying one of them. That's how thoughtless they were. Also, my friends didn't hate me for it. They may be called destructive comments, but in my group they didn't do any destruction. People considered it a part of who I am, and it wasn't a problem." He was right, it wasn't. That's the other interesting thing about destructive comments. We think it's common, but statistically it's only a problem in 15% of my clients. That doesn't mean the other 85% of the world is not guilty of making destructive comments. We all make them every day. It indicates that only 15% of us do it to the point where it is a problem with our colleagues. What you need to find out is whether that 15% includes you. That's when the real problem begins, because once the comment leaves your lips, the damage is done and it's very hard to undo. You can't take it back. No matter how fervently you apologize, and even if the apology is accepted, the comment lingers in the memory. One of my clients was having a casual downtime conversation with his assistant about eye color of all things. "What color are your eyes?" he asked, squinting to peer at her eyes. They're blue. Can't you see that they're blue? She said. Well, they're not really blue, he said. Yes they are, she insisted. They're a sparkling blue. Let's put it this way, he snorted. If your eyes were diamonds, they'd be selling at Zales, not Harry Winston. She was visibly crushed by this cruel, gratuitous jab. The aftermath of this episode is instructive. Within moments of uttering these words, my client erased them from his memory. But his assistant didn't. Even though the comment came at her expense, she replayed the exchange to all her friends, as proof that her boss was a jerk. She replayed it to me, when I interviewed her for feedback about her boss. She was making the point that, although she loved working for her boss, he habitually made destructive comments, which she didn't love. How do we stop making destructive comments? That was my problem several years ago. I was running a small consultancy with a dozen employees. As a feedback professional, I naturally experimented on myself. I had my staff do a full 360-degree evaluation of my behavior. The feedback said I was in the 8th percentile, on avoids destructive comments, meaning that 92% of the people in the world are better at it than I was. I had failed a test that I wrote. My specific challenge, and I'm not proud of this, was not that I made nasty comments to people directly. I would do it when they weren't in the room. This was a problem for me as a manager. In an environment where everyone's preaching the value of teamwork and reaching out in the organization, what happens to the quality of teamwork and cooperation when we stab our coworkers in the back in front of other people? It does not go up. And I wanted the business to succeed. So I talked to my staff. I said, I feel good about much of my feedback. Here's one thing I want to do better: quit making destructive comments. If you ever hear me make another destructive comment about another person, I'll pay you $10 each time you bring it to my attention. I'm going to break this habit. Then I launched into an emotional pep talk, encouraging them to be honest and diligent about helping me. Turns out it wasn't necessary. In fact, they would trick me into making nasty comments, because they wanted the $10. They'd mention names of people guaranteed to bring up some bile, and I took the bait each time. They mentioned a colleague named Max, and I said, can you believe he has a PhD? He has no idea what he's talking about. $10. A customer called and I remarked, he's too cheap to pay. $10. By noon, I was down $50. I locked myself in my office, and refused to speak to anyone for the rest of the day. Of course, hiding helps you avoid the issue, it doesn't help you fix it. But the financial pain got me thinking in the right direction. The next day my nasty comments cost me $30. The third day, $10. This policy was enforced in our office for several weeks. And it cost me money. But eventually I brought my score up to the 96th percentile. I don't make destructive comments anymore, at least not so it's a problem. My experience proves a simple point: spend a few $1,000s and you will get better. Destructive comments are an easy habit to fall into, especially among people who habitually rely on candor as an effective management tool. Trouble is, candor can easily become a weapon. People permit themselves to issue destructive comments under the excuse that they are true. The fact that a destructive comment is true is irrelevant. The question is not, is it true? But rather, is it worth it? What you need to see is that we all spend a great deal of time filtering our truth-telling during the course of each day. I'm not only referring to the little white lies, e.g., complimenting someone's haircut rather than saying it looks ridiculous, that we employ to smooth out each day's routine social exchanges. We instinctively avoid destructive comments when it's a survival issue. We know the difference between honesty and full disclosure. We may think our boss is a complete ass, but we are under no moral or ethical obligation to express that to the boss's face, or to anyone else for that matter. You need to extend the survival instinct not only up the organization but across and down as well. Warren Buffett advised that before you take any morally questionable action, you should ask yourself if you would want your mother to read about it in the newspaper. You can apply a similar test to help you avoid destructive comments. Before speaking, ask yourself, 1. Will this comment help our customers? 2. Will this comment help our company? 3. Will this comment help the person I'm talking to? 4. Will this comment help the person I'm talking about? If the answer is no, the correct strategy does not require a PhD to implement. Don't say it.